psychology students, we're moving into week 11. Can you believe we're now like 30% of the way done, right? If there's not quite 30 weeks. So we're moving along, doing a good job. From week 10, if you no, week 10 was assignments. If you have any questions from week 10, let me know. Hopefully you're able to finish your dream journal. I haven't limited your entrance into week 11 if you haven't finished your dream journal. So if you're still working on it, you can do this assignment and keep going and come back to the dream journal. But do make sure, it is worth partial points during week 11. It's worth full points in week 10. And then week 11, you're losing points each day. But I don't want you not to be able to work on week 11 if you haven't finished your dream journal. So try to get that done. All right, so what are we doing this week? We have this assignment that I'm going over right now. There's a discussion you're going to do as part of your assignment for Monday. And then Tuesday, you're focusing just on encoding and storing memories. Wednesday, if you're doing it by the day, right? You have until Sunday to finish, but just if I'm breaking it down by day for you, Wednesday's retrieving memories, Thursday's forgetting memory, memory distortion, and a quick quiz. It won't take long. And this week also make sure you read the memory project. You don't have to turn it in this week. Just know that you're working on it. And then you're also working on problem solving and decision making this week. So everything is there. There's also obviously extra multiple choice questions if you want to work on them. All right. And these concept maps should go fairly quickly. I don't think they'll take you an hour and a half for each one of these on memory because you're working on little bits of it at a time. The quiz is just a quiz here. It's an outside resource on memory, and hopefully you'll get the answers as you go right after you finish it. So it's a little extra quiz. I kind of like this quiz, and you'll just report how you did and a reflection, right? It's learning. It's just, do I got this down or do I need to keep working on it? And then, like I said, make sure you just read the Improving Memory Project. I hope that what you're learning here in AP Psychology can be useful in another class. So that's the point of the project. All right, so what else are we going to do? We just reviewed the week's assignments. I want to go over some of the terms from last week on cognition because I think sometimes these are tricky and students often ask me questions about them. Then we're going to review a little bit on perception and take a little quiz on, have some quiz questions on perception, and also review some Gestalt. I like Gestalt a lot. All right, so I find that when we did the introduction on cognition, we had words like concepts, prototypes, schemata, right? And this is the question I get sometimes. Please help me sort out the meaning of all of these words. So if you had to take the term concept, right, and put it in your own words, right? I have a blank here. So take a second, right? Pause the video if you need to and just write down for yourself. Don't look it up. Just what do I think a concept means? What do I remember from that? And when you're ready, all right, we're going to pull this away. And if we define this, a mental grouping of similar objects, events, ideas, people. So a concept is just the concept of a table, right? It's all the tables could be fit together, right? Or a basketball game, that's an event, right? We have just in our brain, we don't have each basketball game we've been to. It's a mental grouping of what a basketball game is like, or grandma, right? It doesn't have to be my grandma, right? Grandmas in general. Oh, those are older people, right? We have this way of putting together similar objects, ideas, and events, and that's a concept. All right, so then we have a schema, right? So again, how could I define schema for myself? Pause if you need to, and then come back, right? Oh, I didn't need to uncover that one. A schema, right, is a concept. I hope you said, hey, a schema is a concept, right? And they help us organize and interpret information, right? This knowledge, beliefs, expectations about the world, right? A schema is an example of a concept. We're using the same word here. These aren't different. But we can also have this include expectations of the world, right? And Piaget had these two terms, assimilation and accommodation. Assimilation, right? What are we doing with assimilation? We're incorporating new information into schemas we already have. All right, so I can, well, I'll have to, this is an example of accommodation, so I'll wait. So think about, and Piaget talked about this mostly with young children, right? So you would meet a dog, right? So you would start to form a schema, right? A concept of a dog, similar things, but you only had experience of one. So you meet a German Shepherd, and mommy says, hey, this is a dog. And so you, hey, a dog, all right? And then you come across a dachshund, and mommy says, or daddy, grandma, whomever, says, this is a dog. And you're like, huh? My schema, right, of a dog was big and really furry, and now this is little and not as furry, right? It's smooth, right? So this is assimilating, right? We're taking in new information about what a dog could be, and we're making it, we're kind of expanding our similar objects. Okay, these are both dogs. All right, accommodation, in contrast, is like we have to create, we have to really change our schema or create a new one, right? And so you can see how these are really, really closely. So I'll give you an example of accommodation. My mom tells this story of when I was 5, I went to the pediatrician for my kindergarten readiness assessment. And he asked me, are cats or dogs bigger? And I said, cats are bigger. And the doctor looked at my mom like, what's wrong with this kid? And my mom had to explain that my experience had been one of seeing little dogs and big cats, right? And so once I started to experience bigger cats, I could really adjust my schema, my understanding of the world, to say, oh no, dogs are really bigger than cats, right? So when we change something, we're accommodating, which makes sense. And when we're fitting it into and not really changing it, we're assimilating. Okay, so concept and schema are basically the same. What about prototype? Right? And you might know this outside of psychology, right? Like what is a prototype if you're making something new? And it might help you, right? So a prototype is the best example. So a prototype, and like if we had a prototype of a car, it's not necessarily the best example, but it is an example model of what we want it to be. So a prototype is a mental image of the best example and embodies the most typical features of something. So in terms of a dog, it probably is typically bigger than a cat, right? The most typical features, because usually that's the case, but not always. All right. And so if I had to think of a prototype of a table, typical features, it has a horizontal surface, right? People eat at it, right? All these things that make it typical, right? And it's very kind of then a generalized understanding of what something is. And you can see that as we're taking in more and more examples of something, our prototype might become like a more and more generalized definition. All right. So we got, and schemas. I want to stay on this term before I go to stereotype for a second. Schema, really, we use this for our current knowledge, and we provide it helps us with our future understanding of something, right? So we're kind of taking all the things we know and we're using it to make decisions and to play. So we have lots of examples of schema, mental models. We said concepts. We have social schemas, meaning when you go through the checkout line at a grocery store and you're actually with a person, not with a machine, what do I do? Hi, how's your day? Good, right? You're not going to go into all the things that are wrong because you have a social schema of what you do in that situation, right? People that you only talk to the weather about, what happens. Right, we're going to talk about stereotypes in a minute. We also have our social roles, right? I know how to behave at the grocery store. I know that that's different than when I go to an athletic event, right? In an athletic event, I can cheer and be loud, right? These are all things that we have to help children with, right? Because sometimes they don't know when to be quiet or loud. We also have scripts. That's what I was talking about, right? We know kind of the conversations we can have with people, our worldviews, right? are heuristics. Heuristics are mental shortcuts. You're going to get to that at the end of the week when you do decision making. Archetypes, this is more of a Jungian term. We won't see this for a while, but these are like the hero, right? We know what a hero does. We know what a villain does. We have these kind of the way stories are told from almost every culture, and they build different kind of personality types of characters. But I want to do this one term because the College Board brings this up. It comes up in some questions, so I just want to touch on it. I don't know that I had it in anything else from the week, and that's cultural schemata, right? So we're putting two words together. Schemata is just more than one, and cultural. So this is how we make sense of the world is often culturally determined, right? So here's a situation: an Australian factory supervisor assumes workers know that Easter is close and hence everyone will be taking a holiday. He asks a Vietnamese worker, "You have 5 days off. What are you going to do?" Right? And this Vietnamese worker thought she was being laid off because what's good for her schema, right? Of I'm going to have 5 days off, right? Maybe doesn't understand English as much, but also may not understand that Easter's coming up and doesn't understand why there's a holiday, right? So all the things that are kind of, when we think of cultural schemata, I think sometimes the best way to think about this is a fish in a fishbowl. The fish doesn't understand that the water is the inside and the outside is something else. It just understands its fishbowl. Right. So we are all in this situation, and we can all do things to kind of make sure that we understand that what we're thinking may not be what other people are thinking. All right. Stereotype. Right. So a stereotype, I'm going to read the definition here. Widely held beliefs are generalizations about particular groups. So remember, we said this was an example of a schema, right? It's a framework that helps us. So we all have different ways that we the AP psychology uses this held beliefs about particular groups of people, or often about it. I don't think stereotypes, I disagree with this a little bit, are just about people. And we're going to discuss, I'm going to have you discuss whether you think this is really accurate. Limited knowledge or biased assumptions. That's the definition they give, but I argue with this. They can influence how individuals perceive others and may lead to unfair discrimination. So there's a discussion where I kind of want you to say, does this mean that all stereotypes are negative? Like, does the definition that the College Board is using, does it mean that? Right? Should we make decisions based on stereotypes? Can we really make decisions without using stereotypes? All right, so these are the questions I want you to think about in the discussion forum, and you'll see I ask you to think about this. Don't ask AI. Just tell me what your experience is based on, right? Is this a good definition? Does this mean everything is negative? Can I make decisions without this? Should I make decisions without using stereotypes? All right, and then I posted, so I want you to make an original posting. Then I'd like you to read, this is very short. It'll take you like 4 minutes to read this professor's understanding of this, and then to make a follow-up posting kind of reflecting on what you said originally and using this new information. And finally, just one follow-up so that you're kind of seeing other people's ideas. So that's the discussion for the week. And I hope you kind of see that these terms are very related to one another. All right, and hopefully we'll see how they work out in some multiple choice questions. I think you'll get them. All right, so to keep going, one of the things you worked on last week, because next week I'm going to focus on memory. So one of the things you worked on last week was perception, right? And I just want to hit at some terms here again to kind of go over some ideas. All right, so remember that information processes, these are all higher level, right? So that we need to construct our perceptions. And we do this in two ways, right? One is by top down. And top down means that things, our knowledge, our expectations, our stereotypes, our concepts, our schemata, all of those things are influencing how we interpret that sensory data. And we almost need this because we often need quick, efficient responses to things, right? Like, I don't need to overanalyze every situation. There's many times, like, I'm walking down a dark street at nighttime, right? And I see what looks to be anything threatening to me. This is not a time to analyze it. This is a time where all of my past experiences, things I know, are going to help me make a very quick response. And that makes sense. And then bottom up is the longer time, right? This does rely on data, right? This is taking your sensory data and you're building up, you're taking information about the size, the shape, the color, the brightness, all the constancies we have, and you're using that sensory input to learn something. Makes sense when you're trying to do a scientific experiment, when you're safe, right? When you have time to use all the data to make a decision, right? But not always possible. So just so that you will see questions about top down and bottom up. So make sure you understand the two different ways of cognitive processing. All right, and a term I know I didn't have this week. All right, the easy way to say it is face blindness. The hard way is prosopagnosia. Prosopagnosia, hard word. All right, and these people, they don't use top-down processing, right, to identify individuals. It's specifically about faces, right? So they cannot use the top-down processing to know who people are. They're able to take in what a person looks like, so they can describe whether they have freckles, blue eyes, crooked nose, but they can't tell you who they are. All right, they'll always tell you they don't know who that person is, and we refer to this as face blindness. And it's very rare, but interesting, and it shows us there's a part of our brain is especially used for facial recognition because they can see that areas of the brain are problematic for those people. And so just put the term in there. It might help you with a multiple choice question. I've seen it on the exam. All right, Gestalt principles. If you haven't put little diagrams to help you remember these, this is a good one. I think I put my favorite on the course page. Let me just, there's a favorite. I really like one image. It helps me a lot. I think I shared it. This one right here. All right, so I love this picture because it uses the word Gestalt and it helps you remember what our brain is doing to put things together. I think I shared that one already. Anyways, we got proximity, right? Close objects are perceived as a group, right? So group, I automatically see 4 and 2 because they're next to each other and they're put as a group. All right, similarity, similar objects are perceived as a group, right? So things that are alike one another will be perceived as a group. Remember, Gestalt is all coming together, right? And so how we organize our visual information. Closure, we complete missing parts, right? Our brain just closes in these little gaps, right, without thinking about it. Symmetry and order, symmetrical and orderly elements are perceived as a group, right? So this makes this all together, right? We put it together. Common fate, objects moving together are perceived as a group, right? So things that are moving in a certain direction are perceived as a group together. Figure ground, we perceive objects in the foreground or the background, right? We see this E is coming out of the X, or coming out at us and the X is behind it. All right, continuity elements on a line or curve are related to one another. All right, so these are, and I'm not an artist, but if you are an artist, I'm sure that you've talked about these principles when you've done your design work. So just make sure that you can think of examples of each of them. All right, next part. I cannot describe depth perception as well as he can, and so I'm going to use this video. I want you to, we're focusing here on what are the difference between monocular and binocular cues. So as you watch the video, you can focus on those two things.
Here's a question. Am I walking forward or am I walking backward? This may sound like a silly question and one you obviously know the answer to, but without your conscious awareness, your eyes, along with your brain, are making dozens of instantaneous calculations to determine where I'm headed. This is depth perception. The ability to judge how far objects are away from you, the ability to see the world in 3D as opposed to a 2D flat surface. In this video, we're going to talk about all the depth cues we use to make sense of the world around us. Now, in psychology, depth perception is typically divided into two types of cues. What we call monocular cues, ocular meaning eye or vision and mono meaning one, so we're able to judge depth and distance only using one eye. And also binocular cues, ocular once again meaning eye or vision and bi meaning two, so we're able to judge depth and distance using both eyes. Let's start with monocular cues. Now, the first monocular cue is called linear perspective. And this is the idea that when you have two parallel lines, like the railroad tracks behind me, the further you go in the distance, the more these lines tend to converge into a single point. This point is often called the vanishing point. And you can see linear perspective on sidewalks and in streets. And it lets your brain know that something is getting farther and farther away. The next monocular cue is called relative size. And this is the basic idea that when you have multiple objects that are relatively the same size, like these blue flower pots, the ones that cast a smaller image on your eye, specifically your retina, are going to be perceived as farther away. And the ones that cast a larger image on your retina, like this one, is going to be perceived as closer. Now, you might just assume that the ones behind me are actually getting smaller or shrinking, and that's not too silly of an idea. But because I know the size tends to remain constant, I know they're just getting farther and farther away. Another monocular cue is called texture gradient, and I want you to focus on the word texture. This is the idea that when you see an object up close, you're able to see texture and fine details. And as you get farther and farther away, those details tend to disappear. Here's a really nice example. All the bricks in front of me are extremely detailed, right? You can see all the lines, little leaves, little blemishes, and colors within each brick. But as I pan out, you'll notice that all of those little details tend to disappear. And eventually, it almost becomes one smooth surface, telling my brain we're getting farther and farther away. One monocular cue artists love to use in their drawings and paintings is light and shadow. And artists use shadows to help the viewer know where the light source is coming from, which in turn helps us know how far an object is away from us and even how big an object is. In this example, the way that light hits the basketball and the shadow it creates provides some clues to the brain about its dimensions and depth. And in this shot, the separation between the basketball and its shadow helps me perceive that the ball is off the ground and in motion. Which object is closer to you, the tree or the car? This might sound like a trick question, but it's actually a monocular cue known as interposition or overlap. And this is the idea that when one object blocks another, in this case the tree is blocking the car, the one that is being blocked is farther away. The tree, of course, is going to be closer. Looking at these two garbage cans, we can actually see two monocular cues. Interposition, I know the one on the right is closer because it's partially blocking the one in the back, and also light and shadow. Because the shadow's on the left, I know the light source is coming from above and to the right. Just like light and shadow, this cue is also frequently used by artists in their drawings to depict depth. This is aerial perspective. And rather than using the size of object to see how far something away is, this focuses on color. I'm currently at the beach, and as you can see, the cliffs extend for miles. And as your eyes follow the cliffs into the water, take notice that they become less detailed, blurrier, and lighter in color, almost blending into the blue sky background. This is aerial perspective. The last monocular cue actually involves motion, which is why I'm driving my car. And this is by far one of my favorite ones because we know it, we've seen it, we just never put a name to it. And it's called motion parallax or relative motion. And it's the basic idea that things that are far away when you're in motion appear to be moving at a different speed than things that are close up. If you fixate on a median dividing the highways, it looks like it's going extremely fast, right? But then when you fixate on the trees in the background, it looks like it's going relatively slow. This is a phenomenon known as motion parallax. So now that we've covered monocular cues, judging depth and distance only using one eye, let's focus on binocular cues, understanding depth perception using both eyes. And there's two we're going to focus on. The first binocular cue is called convergence. And this is the idea that as you get closer and closer to an object, your eyes begin to converge or get closer together, almost getting cross-eyed, signaling to your brain this object is really close. As you get farther and farther away from an object, your eyes begin to spread apart, signaling to your brain something's getting farther away. You can actually feel convergence. Notice as they get closer and closer to the stop sign, both eyes begin to come together, feeling a little strained. And as they move away, both eyes begin to move apart, signaling to your brain we're getting farther and farther away. The last binocular cue is known as retinal disparity. Retinal, for retina, that's the back of your eye where light converts into electrical signals, and disparity means difference. So retinal disparity is the idea that each eye sees a different angle of an object. Your brain combines those images together to create a clearer picture of the world. Your left eye is most likely seeing this image. Your right eye is most likely seeing this image. And when you combine them together using retinal disparity, you get a clear picture of the world. To recap, our eyes along with our brain have evolved to detect dozens of cues to process depth perception. From monocular cues, like linear perspective, texture gradient, relative size, to binocular cues, which is critical to seeing the world in 3D, like convergence and retinal disparity.
All right, so I hope that that is helping you, right? So remember, retinal disparity is helping us with this binocular depth cue, right? That the two eyes are working together. And I just summarized what he had here on the monocular visual cues. So if you want to have little pictures, you can stop the video and add. But I think you should be able to get good notes from what he gave. So let's practice to end today. Right, so we have, these are a little bit small, I'll read them for you. It says, Audra is working on a puzzle book and comes across the following picture. Which of the following Gestalt laws would explain Audrey's perception of the image? Closure, similarity, proximity, or continuity? All right. And in the study of visual perception, participants were presented with a figure depicted and asked to describe what they saw. Of the 100 participants, 97 said they saw a cube. Which of the following Gestalt principles would best describe the impact of these results? So we see a cube here, and both of these, the College Board has picked closure. So these aren't mine, right? And so I want you to, I brought this up because I think sometimes this is the hardest thing I remember when I did multiple choice questions. If I ever saw two questions with the same answer, I would really second guess myself. All right. So make sure that you don't feel that way, that these things, they're not, these both are closure, right? And don't feel that you have to pick something different if you see two questions with the same answer. All right, next one. Which of the following monocular depth cue is most represented in this image? Linear perspective, texture gradient, shading, or relative size? That's the first one. If you need to pause the video, pause the video. If not, in a groundbreaking study, a researcher shared a translation of the American Indian folk tale with middle-class British participants. Later, the participants were asked to repeat the story. The researcher measured the accuracy of the recollections when they repeated the story. Several of the participants changed the word canoes to boats and hunting seals to fishing. Which of the following explains why the participants made errors in their recollection? The participants only had a chance to repeat the story 5 times. The participants had difficulty repeating the story because the details didn't fit with their cultural schemata. The participants were experienced drive reduction and therefore could not carefully to the story. The participants experienced the serial position effect. All right, so let's look. Right, this one is linear perspective, so monocular depth cue, right? To see the image, that it's all going right to here, linear perspective, because we have a bunch of the same lines. And here, you'll probably pick up that I mentioned cultural schema, so you understood that right. These British students, they don't have canoes, they have boats, they don't have hunting seals, they have fishing, and so they're remembering it based on their cultural schemata. All right, last ones. I attended a concert for her favorite band. As the band played her favorite song, she sang along and repeated one of the lyrics incorrectly. Another person nearby heard the mistake and told her that she had made a mistake. She was confident she heard and sang the lyrics correctly. Which of the term best describes her belief? All right, so overconfidence, bottom-up processing, inattentional blindness, or hindsight blindness. One night, Noelle went to a new restaurant. While waiting for her meal, she could not ignore the slurping sound the other diners made while eating. She was so focused on that sound she could not even enjoy her meal. Which of the following concepts explains Noelle's experience? Gestalt principle of proximity, monocular cue of texture gradient, change blindness, or selective attention, which we had that a little bit ago. So we'll see. All right. So overconfidence. This is just a review of terms, and selective attention. All right. So see if you got them. If you have questions, just leave them on your notes for me. And I hope that you found this to be a useful weekly video. Have a good week and keep working hard.